Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Sean Swarner. After surviving 2 terminal cancers, been given 14 days to live, and emerging from a year-long coma, Sean went on to climb Everest, all of the 7 continents' peaks, including in Antarctica, skied to both poles, and completed the Hawaii Ironman World Championships. And guess what? All of those with 1 lung. Sean is the founder of the Cancer Climber Association and author of Becoming Unstoppable, Conquering Your Everest. Sean, welcome to the Future Space.
I appreciate that. And as you were talking, I was thinking, wow, I want to meet this guy.
I want to meet him too. In fact, I'm talking to him today.
Well, I'm excited. I appreciate the opportunity.
Looking forward to really learn more about the journey and these amazing things that you've accomplished. But before we go there, could you share with us 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
Absolutely. And I am going to say limitless, exploration, and transcendence.
Limitless exploration and transcendence.
Well, limitless, I thought about it for a bit, and it represents, it's pretty self-explanatory, it pretty much represents the infinite possibilities and the vastness of space. We all get that. But exploration reflects the spirit of discovery and curiosity. And space travel, yes, but more so, I think it embodies the spirit of discovery and pushing beyond limits. And the third, transcendence, signifies the human ambition to go beyond our known boundaries. I think as individuals with our own potentially self-constructed limited boundaries, or even as a species, because once we show others true possibilities, it goes beyond ourselves and then starts to empower others.
That is the roles of these new horizons. I mean, now we're looking up at space and it's calling us. But if you grew up in a little village surrounded by mountains, mountains are calling you to go beyond. These new frontiers are that incentive, that motivation to push ourselves. But it's incredible that now we can talk about the reality of going to space. Sean, what is the human story of space? What would be your answer?
My answer would be I love the human story, because I think it goes back to those some of the 3 words I was limited to, because I wanted to come up with more than 3 words. But it's about pushing limits. It's confronting the unknown, because I think a lot, if not most of us, we're terrified of the unknown. But when you confront that, it usually isn't as bad as we initially thought. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but my life was defined by, let me back up. Others have tried to define my life by boundaries they wanted to set up for me. Limits that came from circumstances and illness. And as you know, I was told numerous times that I only had days to live. And then after surviving 2 terminal cancers, I was told I had physical limits, and those would confine me to a little box people wanted to put me in. But I refused to accept those limitations. And while I was standing on the summit of Mount Everest with 1 lung, I realized I pushed past those confinements and limitations. So I think the human story of space is not about rockets and satellites. It's actually about perseverance, resilience. I try to combine perseverance and resilience, so we'll call it resilience. And the belief that no matter the odds, there's always more to explore, more to learn, and more importantly, I think there's always more to achieve.
I always find it like we should always embrace moving forward and looking forward and trying to do more but better, trying to think that things are impossible. And in fact, there are 2 words. There's a word that for me I struggle with, and is the can't, right? C-A-N''T. Can't is just it's such a definitive statement that has nothing after. And you don't have to explain why, you don't have to do anything, you just have to go and say, I can't. As opposed to, it doesn't work, And it doesn't work means that it doesn't work now, but it can work, and it's just a question of trying to figure out a solution. It's also dynamic. Right? What works today doesn't necessarily work tomorrow, and it's a relationship with the environment. And so I've always been like not a big fan of the word can't.
I'm right there with you. And I think it goes back to something I came up with a long time ago. What I say is about me. What you hear is about you. So if I say something and you don't think it's possible, that doesn't represent my abilities. It represents a limiting belief in your own.
I think that when you go beyond the can't and you go and accomplish the impossible, it also reminds people a certain ownership of what they perceive is possible and not possible. It's almost kind of a little mirror to themselves. Like, what has been the reaction, not only from the public speaking that you've done, but also from just the general public when they learn about everything that you've done?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's usually one of two things. After I tell people I'm the only person in history to accomplish what I have, and I've done that after 2 terminal cancers and so forth with 1 lung and a medically induced coma, they always look at me and they say, well, I haven't done anything in my life. Or they turn around and they say, wow, you've really inspired me to push beyond those limits and boundaries. And it's always interesting how it comes out, because I can tell the type of person that I'm speaking to based on their response.
Was the attitude of going there present with you before? I mean, well, I want you to answer the question. I also want, for the audience to recap what happened and what was the transition of coming out of all this and deciding, you know what, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm going to go on and do all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how what I've been through has defined who I am. And going back to the first cancer, I had no night sweats. I had no symptoms, absolutely nothing. It was just a freak knee injury that made every other joint swell up. And the knee injury put me in the hospital, not the cancer. So if it wasn't for a knee injury, I'd probably be dead. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My backyard was a cornfield or a bean field, depending on the season. And they initially started treating me for pneumonia because they had no idea that I had advanced stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when you're sucking on a nebulizer, you're not going to cure cancer that way. So I wasn't getting any better. But as an 8th grader, freshman year in high school, the cheerleaders were coming into the room, bringing me balloons. I had all this attention. I loved it. I'm not saying I loved having cancer, but I loved the attention as a teenager, a young teen. And it was fantastic until they took me to a larger hospital, and I was pretty much informed that I had stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they told my parents, your firstborn son has an expiration date of 3 months. So I went through a year of being in and out of the hospital. My support system was my mom, my dad, my younger brother, the hospital system, the doctors, the nurses. Everyone was rallying around me to fight for this and fight for my life. And in fact, I remember very, very vividly when I was about 3 months into the treatment. I was 60 pounds overweight, and I was on the bottom of the shower floor on my hands and knees. My hair fell out in chunks because of the chemotherapy, and it was clogging up the drain, and the drain was not allowing the water to go down, so the water was rising up in the shower. And it was in that moment when I felt utterly hopeless, to be honest with you. I was sobbing. I had nothing. But I also decided that I didn't want to focus on not dying. I wanted to focus on living, which is just a perspective shift. And having that insight at such a young age helped going through the second cancer. And if it wasn't for the first cancer, they wouldn't have found the second cancer. Because I was going in for a checkup for the first cancer, when in one day they found a tumor on an X-ray the size of a golf ball in my right lung. They did a needle biopsy where they threaded a needle through my ribs to aspirate part of the tumor. They took out another lymph node from my neck. They put in a Hickman catheter, which is like a permanent IV. They cracked open my ribs. They removed the tumor. They sewed me back up. They put it in a drainage tube, and they started chemotherapy in less than 24 hours. This time around, they diagnosed me with a type of cancer that affects 6 out of a million people with 3 out of a million people with a prognosis of 6%. And this time around, the doctors told my parents that I had 14 days to live. So stop me if you have any questions. I'll keep going, because I went through 3 months of intense chemo, a month of radiation therapy, and then 10 more months of chemotherapy. I lost 60 pounds this time around. I was in a medically induced coma for a year of my life. Lost the function of my right lung. But going to college, I think I was reliving my high school years because they were taken from me. And I turned into a party animal. I turned into your typical, I would say, frat boy, but I wasn't even in a fraternity. And I started off molecular biology, taking organic chemistry and immunology, and it didn't take me too long to realize that you can't pass organic chemistry if you don't open a book and study. So I decided to switch my majors and go to psychology and help other people touched by cancer. And then fast forward a number of years, I wanted to give back to the cancer community and then eventually others to help them by screaming literally from the highest platform in the world that you can do anything you put your mind to.
Incredible. Like I'm trying to understand if there was a moment you saw life differently, or you saw bits and pieces of the puzzle that led you to the conclusion to decide to go and say, you know what, not only am I not going to let this not define me, but I'm going to go and do that.
There were a number of moments when I decided to take my life in my own hands and run with it. Because when you're laying in a hospital bed and a man of the cloth comes in and starts reading you your last rites, that really puts things in perspective. And I know, and we all know, that every single one of us on earth, we all have an expiration date. We just don't know when it is. I was given that expiration date numerous times, and I decided to not listen to him. And I pushed forward. And I also remember the hospital at the time. Like, as I mentioned, I have a younger brother. The hospital wanted me to have a living will. As I remember laying in the hospital bed while the pastor was reading me my last rites. I looked at my mom and said, "What does a hospital want? Isn't my brother going to get my hand-me-downs anyhow? Like, what could they possibly want from a 16-year-old who's going to pass away?" But I think over time, understanding and how the cancers put life in perspective, I now know, and I hope everybody knows this, knowing that we're all going to die at some point should be one of the biggest motivators to truly live.
That is one of I think, the commonality between cancer survivors, where with the proper support, the hindsight is the cancer was the best thing that happened to me. Obviously, those are the ones who survived and were able to grow from this. I'll share a little story from my past. I was in Florida. I was there with my then girlfriend. I was in my 20s or a teenager. And I watched the movie My Life with Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman. And it's the story of this PR king. So he lives in LA, has a big firm, super successful, Michael Keaton's character. And he gets diagnosed with a cancer. And he go on, and back in those days, you have these big recording cameras. And he goes on to record a movie because he also learns that his wife, Nicole Kidman, is pregnant. And he understands that he's not going to be there. And through the process of recording testaments and about his life, he realizes that he had become king of his own life, and realizing that from his perspective, it looked really great, but as he dig deeper, everything was just not what he thought it was. And then his wife is asking him to find that thing inside of him. But I remember that when I watched that movie, I saw myself. I saw that if I was not going to change, my body would become that. I would have a cancer. And that was one of the big trigger in my life to really change certain things that I was doing. But I think that these moments of facing your mortality kind of really put things in perspective, as you said. But it's incredible that what you've accomplished. And it's always a reminder, because right now we're in a society that is so consumed by the noise, everything that has to be, all the challenges, all the things that are wrong, all the doom and gloom. And we struggle in seeing behind that. Right? We think that this is the worst place that the human species have done. And I'm constantly reminding people, we went through wars, famines, people dying by the millions every year. And here we are today. So wherever we are in this moment, we can go through.
Absolutely. In all honesty, I think if you're seeing or looking for problems in your own life and others, you see obstacles, whatever it might be, you're laying out all the excuses, it's because you've trained your brain to do so. And I think looking at how technology is, looking at how we are as human beings, it's very difficult to rise above the noise and be positive when so many people are negative. And I think it's because our brains are trained to look for the negative, because it goes back to fight or flight. And if you're constantly looking for the good, then you're not going to run away from a bear. You say, oh, that's a cute little polar bear, you pat him on the head and you're not going to survive that. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of longevity and you have to protect your family, then absolutely it works. But we're at a stage now where we don't have to worry about fighting for our lives for the majority. There are some people who are in dire situations, obviously. But if you're looking for those difficulties, those tough spots, those negativities that are in the world, it is just going to constantly inundate your mind and bring you down. It takes more energy, just like when you're a little kid. It's easier to leave your room a mess than it is to clean it up. Your parents tell you, hey, you have to go make your bed. Every morning I wake up, hey, I hear my mom in the back of my head, hey, you need to make your bed. It's like, why? I'm just going to unmake it later today anyhow. What's the point? But it's those things that you do throughout the day that help keep you focused on what you want to eventually accomplish. And I think going through the cancers I had, I don't want to say I wish everybody went through them, but I wish most people had the perspective I have on life because of them. And regardless of whatever situation we might find ourselves in, I couldn't control the fact that I had cancer. And sitting there asking, looking up, oh God, why me, why me, why me? Asking that question's futile because I may never know the answers. However, I always have a choice in how I react to it.
That's the power that we have. We don't have any power on the things that have happened. We have a power what we do with them. And I always say that, when shit happens in life, you really have two choices. You don't have 5 choices. You don't have 10 choices. It really comes down to 2. You can accept and move on, or you can deny it and stay stuck. If you decide to go the route of go with it, do whatever it is, then these things become part of you, and you are in places where you would have not been, had you been stuck. It's like water. If it stays stagnant, then algae starts to set in, and then it suffocates, takes away the oxygen. But if you go the other way, if you let the water go, then it is in a place where it would have not been had it be for this thing. And my thought is, it's not that things happen for a reason. Things happen, and then we give them a reason by doing something with it. I was reminded when I was listening to your story of this podcast that and maybe you know about him, but he's called the Batman. He's a blind person who was brought up blind, but his mother never made him feel like he was a victim. So he went on thinking this like, hey, I can figure the world around. So he really developed the skills to climb fences and ride a bike and does echolocation. And it was really hard for him after that to start hanging out with other blind people, because they had been brought up with always with this idea that they needed someone else. They needed help. And they were always at the mercy of, they were the victim, as opposed to just being someone who has agency and can take care of their lives. Okay, you have the general public who doesn't know what cancer is, but then you have others who are in a place of suffering and they see you. What's their reaction when they try to put the dots together in their own suffering?
It's interesting you chose the word suffering, because I think in any situation, suffering is a choice. Pain may not necessarily be a choice, because I remember being tested for the cancer in my bones. So when I was 13, they did a bone marrow test, where if you're not familiar with that, it's almost like this surgical drill that goes into essentially your back, right above your butt cheeks. And they drill in. And at 13 years old, I was treated as an adult, and I could feel the nerve endings being dragged down by this surgical needle. And I passed out. That wasn't a choice. That was pain. But afterwards, it was my choice to suffer through the cancer or not. And I think it goes back to different perspectives, because, talking about the Batman that you mentioned, he grew up and that was his perspective. He didn't see it as a disability. He didn't see it as a hindrance. He didn't see it as anything potentially holding him back, because for him, that was normal. And for me growing up after these two cancers, that was normal. It's amazing how malleable the human body and the human mind can be, to adapt to the most horrendous things. But I think it's our own perspective on what we're capable of that holds us back.
Where did you learn this? Did you have someone around you, your parents or your grandparents, that from a young age helped you understand that as an individual, you had that power?
I think it goes back to when I was 5 years old or 6 years old is when I started competitive swimming. I was a competitive swimmer for years and years. And well, until I had my right lat muscle cut into, and now I have pretty much one lat muscle. Now all I do is just swim in circles, so that doesn't help any. But when I initially started swimming, 5, 6 years old, I remember doing the 50-meter breaststroke, touching the wall, my mom or my dad standing at the end of the lane, pulling me out of the water. And they would always ask me two questions. Did you do your best? And did you have fun? And if I could answer yes to both of those, then fantastic. It was never, hey, why didn't you beat Daniel? Why didn't you beat Scott? Why didn't you beat Steve? Because the next week, my goal was to beat the time that I swam the weekend before, slowly progressing on my own. So I think the perspective came from my parents and everything that I've taught myself along the way, but it was always from them. It stemmed. I never had to be the best, but I always had to be my best. And I think that really helped with the perspective of life, pushing myself. And it goes back, we all have heard it before, that 1%, it'd be 1% better today than you were yesterday. And it's so true.
Oh, absolutely. And talking about being your best, you went up to do Everest, skied the 2 poles, Hawaiian Ironman, and now you're about to push that best, that personal best. You're about to do 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 continents. Please share with us that personal best. And if that is that personal best, then what's next?
I've been asked numerous times, why do you do what you do? Everest with one lung was at one point thought physiologically impossible. I might go back and attempt it again with my one lung and no supplemental oxygen, just to see if we can do it. Looking at we'll just call it the 777 is actually called the Global Marathon Challenge. I want to continue pushing the envelope because in my mind, I need to believe something's possible first and then make it happen. Whereas I think the majority have to see something's possible, and then they believe that they might be able to do it themselves. And I also want people to understand that so many people wait until Friday. They wait till the weekend to be, to celebrate. Then they wait until the holidays to celebrate some more. And then they wait their entire lifetime to be happy. So many people are just waiting, for the end of the week. They're waiting for the end of the year. I'm not waiting until the end of my life to do things. And I don't think the rest of the world should as well, because I don't want to be on my deathbed and look back at all the opportunities that passed me by. I want to grab onto them because I have seen them pass me by laying in the hospital bed when the world kept moving on. And I literally had to crawl from the hospital bed to the bathroom.
You remind me, I have to send you a story that I wrote about waiting, about how much we wait for the bus, we wait for things to come to us. And then you have others who don't believe in waiting, always kind of seeking it. And then finding the balance in life of you can't let the world go by. You can't wait for the world to come to you, but at the same time, you have to be able to wait for the magic to present itself. It's like just finding a certain equilibrium between the two.
It's real quick. It's funny you mentioned the bus, because earlier today I was running and I passed this bus stop every day for the past week. And I see the same people waiting for the bus. So this time running by, I looked at them and I was like, this is more reliable. And then I saw them at the next bus stop because I beat the bus to the bus stop. And I looked at them and just waved in the window and I kept on going.
I have a question. I've been asked often by doing what I did when I was more focused on Fear the Wild and doing these sort of wilderness expeditions. And people have always kind of wondered or thought that I was a thrill seeker, that I was an adrenaline junkie. And my response was always absolutely not. In fact, I'm not. I don't like to take unnecessary risks. I'm not a big fan. I'm not an adrenaline junkie. But what I'm always interested is trying to learn how I react to risk. Like, risk are concrete, they're physical, you can analyze them, you can study them, you can train for them. But then our fears are interpretation of those risks, depending on our upbringing and on our concept of what is comfortable and what is not. And I remember this conversation that I had. I was in Argentina and I was talking to gauchos because we were in a swamp, and from my perspective, there was danger and death everywhere. There were snakes, crocodiles, and stuff that could just grab you at any time. And the conversation with the gauchos were like, oh no, this is like totally natural. This is fun. What you guys do in New York City with all the cars are just absolutely insane. That is insanity. And just realizing that the difference of perspective, your perspective. So for me, when I used to go out, it's not that I necessarily would put myself in danger, but I would try to learn not to be defined by those risks and understand the agency and the power that I have to go beyond that. Do you have a similar approach with those? Like, are you a thrill seeker? Are you going for the adrenaline, or this is really just for you a way to go beyond the risk and the fear, to prove that ultimately that we have agency on those matters?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at how long it takes to do, say, an expedition up Everest, or climbing Denali, the highest mountain in North America, or skiing to the North Pole, or skiing to the South Pole, it's not over in seconds or minutes or even hours. I spent 4.5 weeks on the side of Mount Everest. Adrenaline doesn't kick in unless you're falling into a crevasse or trying to outrun an avalanche. It just doesn't happen. So, like you, I enjoy taking calculated risks. And I think I'm in Puerto Rico right now, and I think it's more dangerous driving in Puerto Rico than it is climbing up Mount Everest because of how the traffic is. It's all based on perspective. So, like with the gauchos, they see their lives as being completely normal. They know how to handle the situation because that's what they grew up in. But I also think that if we stay in our comfort zone our entire lives, we will never live. We will be alive, but we'll never truly be living. And I think it's our own unique perspectives and it's our own fears that hold us back from that. But sometimes we need the encouragement from others to say, hey, you can do this. You can go ahead and push that. So I think taking calculated risks is the way to go. I don't say I'm addicted to adrenaline. I've done bungee jumping before. I have skydived. Past tense of skydiving. I've done that. But I think it goes back to, and I have been a keynote speaker for a long time, and I remember one guy in the audience asked me, well, what's the next big adventure? And I said, well, I recently got married. And somebody else, I think it was his friend, said, well, that's more dangerous and more difficult than climbing Mount Everest. So, to each person, it's an adventure.
Yes, because it's not supposed to end, right? It's this ongoing expedition where things are constantly changing. You meet a person at a particular time in your life, and you're a person, and then life happens. And so how do you manage change at different time and at different places and reacting differently until you're no more? And so being married is a long expedition.
I have a question for you. Going back to what you said, life happens. Do you think life happens or you happen for life, or you can make life happen? That's the question. Do you think life happens or you can make life happen?
It goes parallel to nature versus nurture. I think that there's not a definite disconnect, and the two live together. I think that there are facts of life that you're born with, the era that you're in. Your biology has a certain determination. And then after that, there's the agency that you have, what you can do. And then there's another layer on top of that. There's a certain luck. And luck can be just totally out of nothing, or it can be you increasing the odds. But I've always thought that the result of someone's success or someone's misery or someone's unhappiness is a result of three things. Like I said, the biology of what you have, then how you were brought up, and the environment that you find yourself when shit happens or when life happens. Like, you could have the greatest biology that you were given, raised by amazing parents with amazing values, but then surrounded by really bad actor when that happens, and it will take you to some place that maybe not be great. You could be given the worst biology in this world, grew up with awful parents, but when shit happens, if you have incredible people that can help you and make you grow, then you could end up being like an amazing person. So I think that these three elements are constantly, it's always dynamic, it's always moving around.
So for you, it's not just A plus B equals C. It's A plus B times C, take the square root of D, multiplied by 25 equals.
Absolutely. It's, nature is chaotic by design. And that's the thing that we're constantly, even with quantum computer that we're going to be finding, is independently of how much we want to predict the unpredictable, we constantly go back to we're always reminded that there are always exceptions, and even when we think it's not possible, it's going to happen. And the ones who take it for granted will lose it. And every time that you get to these places that, oh my God, I've finally done it, it's only a moment until you're reminded of the unfairness of life and the randomness of life. In fact, life doesn't want perfection because there's nowhere to go, right? It wants disruptions and conflict so that you evolve and you grow, because the absence of tension is a flat line, and a flat line is no life.
You know, it's interesting because I think we can predict so many things with such amazing accuracy in the lab on a computer, but there's one variable that we will never truly understand, which will throw those equations out the door and out of whack so much, and it's the human will.
That is the thing that separates us from the animals, I think.
Absolutely. And it's defining the purpose for doing it. Again, going back up Everest with one functioning lung is physiologically impossible to do that. I was told that many times. But if you can discover a deeper purpose and meaning behind what you're doing, you're going to discover that whatever is within you will always be stronger to help you overcome any obstacle that gets in your way.
Sean, before we get into your 3 words of wisdom, there's a topic that I want to touch with you. Often people have asked me about solitude and being alone. It's one thing to be by yourself in the remoteness of the wilderness, in these places where literally there's no one around you. And there's something else about being surrounded by people and being so close to people and yet feeling alone. Like you can live in New York surrounded by 8 million people and feel extremely lonely. When you had your cancer, did you feel alone? Was there a loneliness because you're the only person that can understand what you're going through? And explain a little bit also those feelings, 2 expeditions that you've done. Was there a moment where you said to yourself, this is ridiculous. What am I doing here? I should be home having a glass of wine.
Going through the cancers, there were numerous times I felt alone, even though I had my family, I had the support groups, I had the doctors. In fact, there were numerous nights, and anybody who has been in the hospital can relate to this. When the nurses come into your hospital room, every hour on the hour, all you want to do is be left alone. You just want that time by yourself. But every time I did feel alone, it was by choice. Because like you said, going into New York City surrounded by millions of people, it's your choice if you feel alone. You can go to the end of the street and just say hello. I travel a lot, and it's amazing who you can meet and the conversations you can strike just by saying hello. So I learned at a very young age, if I choose to be alone, I'm going to be alone. I call it me time, Sean time. And I'm probably one of the few males that will admit it. I have Monday me time. I enjoy taking baths. I will go downstairs in my house, turn on the bubble jets, and I will disappear for a couple hours. But that's no technology. I disappear, gone. But I think it's to help recharge my batteries. It's very similar to being in nature. Aside from going to the North Pole when we were thousands of miles from nowhere and we were being tracked by polar bears, that's not fun to be alone. Thankfully, a polar bear never caught us, but we made it to the North Pole safe and sound. No one got eaten. Our doctor was evacuated from the trip, but everyone was fine. But I think in any situation, it goes back to when I first got cancer. Why me? Why me? I'm in this situation, regardless of what's happening, it's still my choice in how I want to react to it. If I want to be alone, I'm alone. If I want to be with other people, I'm with other people. Oftentimes when I travel, people ask me, the question always comes up, what do you do? And if I don't want to talk, I'll tell them I'm a garbage collector. If I want to talk to someone, I will tell them, well, I'm an author of a couple books. I have an Emmy-nominated film on Amazon. I'm the only person in history, blah, 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 blah. It all depends on my day.
Part of my expedition process, my creative process, if you want to call it, I've always planned half of it and leave half of the unexpected. Because my goal was always to go and capture the spirit of remote locations where I'd never been. So I've always found it arrogant that I could predict what it would be like. So the way that I planned this was to go and stay with people that lived over there, be hosted by them, and then share meals, drink a glass of wine together, and listen to their stories. And it was through their eyes that I got to really learn their places. But I started, the biggest takeaway from that was realizing that every single person on this planet wants the same thing. They all want to be valued in who they are. They want to do something meaningful. They want to put food on the table, and they want to give their children a future. Then it gets complicated. But having that conversation and being open and going beyond these barriers that we put, you always find a commonality that is always refreshing. So thank you for reminding us.
You know, I came up with a really good idea, I think. Based on what you said, you plan half the trip, half the expedition, and then you let the other half go. I would love for us to get together. You plan and pick the place, tell me where, and don't tell me where we're going. Nothing about the trip. I have no idea what's going on. You plan everything and we show up. But you go first, and then I get to plan where you go without knowing.
Sounds like a plan. Let's make this happen.
Let's do it.
Good. As long as this does not involve climbing Everest for 4 months. 4 months of preparation.
No, it'll be a one week trip. That's it. We'll have to limit it to a certain time frame.
Excellent. Yes, let's do that. Sean, 3 words of wisdom. What would be Sean's 3 words of wisdom?
These were difficult. First, I thought inspire, motivate, and empower. Because my entire life, I've always wanted to inspire people to believe there's more, motivate them to take the first step, and then empower them to do it on their own. But I did some more thinking, and I thought persevere, dream, and inspire. Persevere because no matter the obstacle, we can always conquer the impossible with the right mindset and the right reason behind it. Dream, I think, you let your aspirations stretch beyond the stars, using the whole space analogy. And embrace possibilities that are beyond limits. And then inspire, you need to use your journey to lift others up, showing that hope and resilience can overcome any odds or any obstacle.
If you had the chance to go to space, would you?
Absolutely. One thing we didn't talk about was when I was actually diagnosed with my first cancer, I was signed up and ready to go to space camp, but then, well, cancer had other ideas for me.
Well, we're getting to a time now in our society where these physical limits are not an issue. In fact, Jared Isaacman, when he went up, took a cancer survivor. And so that is an opportunity that wasn't there before. So I really hope, I did connect you with Blue Origin, so hopefully something might happen.
Appreciate that. I definitely do. And I appreciate the opportunity to connect as well. And I'm excited for our week journey together, whatever we come up with.
Absolutely. Let's give ourselves like a time frame, whether it's a year or 2 years, but let's make this happen. And I want to know what's going to happen after those 7 marathon in 7 days. On 7 continents. Wait, so 7 continents. You're doing Antarctica, the marathon in Antarctica?
We're flying from Cape Town to White Fang, Antarctica. Yeah, and then White Fang is Antarctica is the first marathon because it's just the biggest variable with weather. And once we start the run, the clock starts, and we do a marathon there, hop on the plane, fly back to Cape Town, hop off the plane, do a marathon, get back on the plane, repeat the whole sleep, eat, hydrate, rest thing to Perth, to in Istanbul, Cartagena, and finish in Miami.
I assume that there's a website, Instagram, all of the above where they can follow?
All the above. We're actually doing it to raise awareness for longevity and lung cancer.
Longevity. Great. We'll make sure that we put all the links so that people can follow and can support. Sean, amazing story. I think an amazing lesson in these times where people get so focused on the noise around them, but to be able to see beyond and to believe in our capacity.
Absolutely. It's interesting that oftentimes for someone to change, why does it take a dire situation or a life and death diagnosis for people to make changes in their lives. It doesn't have to be that way. You can change now for the good. So don't avoid bad things from happening. Go after the good things you want in life.
Yeah, that could be a little bit of a longer conversation, because it's just the conservation of energy in physics and in nature almost prevents being proactive. I mean, you can talk about change, you can think about change, but because change forces you to expend energy and go into uncertainty because you don't know, you have an idea of what it could be, but you're not sure yet. So the conservation of energy almost kind of forces you to avoid change until it's inevitable. And then after that, you have to make it, right? It's like even water, it's like anything. Water will go into a direction until it doesn't, and then it has to figure it out, go around. So that's why change is so hard for people, is because of the expenditure and the uncertainty that you have to apply to it. But what we've forgotten is our capacity to react to change and grow from it. I know that like often we would love for these moments not to be part of the equation, but if you look at like even from nature, every single species risk to destroy their environment because every single species are just set to eat and procreate until they can't, right? And then they will get to the limit of their environment, and then they have to figure out how to move forward. But the foundations of life are meant to create a certain conflict so that evolution is always created and things don't become stagnant.
Absolutely. And I think we could talk forever, because I was thinking, you can be uncomfortable now or you can be uncomfortable later. So you either sacrifice for what you want now, or what you want becomes the sacrifice.
That's the theory. In application, it's different. We've all done it, right? You're in a bad relationship and you know it's bad for you, but the power of certainty, right? You know where you stand, you know it's bad. There's a certain comfort in that. You know that it could be something better, but you don't know really. It could be not. And you try to avoid it as much as you want to, but the inevitable happens, and then it implodes or it explodes. And then you go through this period of, I will never love again. I will never be in a relationship again. The pain or the suffering, depending what you choose. And then 6 months later or a year later, you look back and you don't understand why you stayed in that relationship for so long, because you're in a much better place. And that is the thing that we need, the context that we need to always bring back into these moments where we think, oh my God, this is the end of it. It's not the end of it. It's just a period to go through, and then it will be better at the end.
It's a new beginning. And do me a favor, please don't edit that section and put it right after when I talked about recently getting married.
Yes, we'll do that. We'll bring it back. Sean, it was a pleasure. Let's get that ball rolling about that collaboration.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Daniel. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yes. Take good care.
You too.